ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ fateh. Welcome to the segment of Khoj Gurbani's a-sabad-a-day. The recitation continues from Rag Thanasari, Mahalla Chotha, Guru Ramdas. The recitation. Thanasari Mahalla Chotha, Gun Kahu Har Lahu, Kar Seva Satgur, Iv Har Har Naam ਧਿਆਈ, ਹਰ ਦਰਗਹਿ ਭਾਵਹਿ, ਫਿਰ ਜਨਮ ਨ ਆਵਹਿ, ਹਰ 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 ਜੋਤ ਸਮਾਈ। ਜਪ ਮਨ ਨਾਮ ਹਰੀ, ਹੋ ਸਰਬ ਸੁਖੀ, ਹਰ ਜਸ ਊਚ ਸਭਨਾ ਤੇ ਊਪਰ, ਹਰ 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 ਸੇਵ ਛੜਾਈ। ਰਹਾਉ ਹਰ ਕਿਰਪਾ ਨਿਧ ਕੀਨੀ ਗੁਰ, ਭਗਤ ਹਰ ਦੀਨੀ, ਤਬ ਹਰ ਸਿਉ ਪ੍ਰੀਤ ਬਨ ਆਈ। ਬਹੁ ਚਿੰਤ ਵਿਸਾਰੀ, ਹਰਿ ਨਾਮ ਉਰਧਾਰੀ, ਨਾਨਕ ਹਰ ਭਏ ਹੈ ਸਖਾਈ। ਗੁਣ ਕਹੋ ਹਰ ਲਹੋ। The virtues of the Har Self are spoken of and received Kari Seva Satgur, by submission to the enlightener Guru. So there is a process. Iv Har Har Naam Tyai, in such a way, says Guru Ramdas, is the wisdom of Naam, the wisdom of the Creator, contemplated. हर दरगह पावै, फिर जन्म न आवै, हर हर जोत समाई, हर हर jot samai. When awareness becomes illuminated by the light of wisdom, it is then reflected in thought, in word and deed. Har 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 jot samai, indicators of thought, word and deed. Then one lives in harmony with the order of existence. Har dargah paveh. That's a pleasing feeling. And what happens is, fir janam na aave, then egoic conditioning of the mind ceases. The birthing of the ego that happens repeatedly stops. So that is the path of wisdom. The virtues are first verbalized, that is to say, they are articulated by the enlightener Guru, and then they're internalized. So the Guru is the trigger that activates this process. And what we see here is that the path of the Guru is essentially the path of virtue cultivation. These are qualities that are deemed necessary as grounding for action. So ultimately, this path of wisdom that we speak of in Gurbani is the skill that we need to develop through qualities and skills and capacity building of being in flow or harmony with the current of life, with your environment. Because when one is in flow with the river of life, then the ego ceases, meaning if you have looked at the river and the eddies that form within it, the whirlpools, the vortex, that is what the ego is. It keeps spinning around and around and around. That spinning ceases. Phir janam na aave. You don't get stuck in that eddy, but you are flowing with the current. So therefore, jap man naam hari, ho hai sarb sukhi. When the mind turns inward and realizes the presence of its sustaining center, the self, then the mind comes to abide in a state of perpetual ease. Why? Because it is then in the flow. Oho Sarva Sukhi. So this state of orientation to the self is something that you cannot put any value on. It is of a different order altogether. Har jas uch sabna te upar. So the words would suggest that this is some sort of a hierarchical order where praise of the Har is of the highest order. That is not the case. The thought being presented here is that it is of a different quality altogether. It is beyond worldly valuation. They are not stacking it in a hierarchy here. So what this is it is freedom from the compulsion of the mind's habitual patterns of self-referential engagement. Har 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 Seva, Shaddai, I'm freed from that inner compulsion. So freedom here is being reframed not as an escape from the world, Shaddai, but as release from compulsion. Through this meditative activity, we foster a sense of internal equilibrium. Praise, Har Jas, shouldn't be confused as praising a deity, but recognition of one's own highest orientation, so that one can act in harmony. This is removing one's psychological bondage. The Guru goes on to say, Har Kripa Nidha Kini Gure. The Guru is the bestower of the treasury of grace. You first need grace, an awakening, if you will. Gure Pagat Hardini. So the Guru is doing two things. It's bestowing grace, and then it is awakening devotion within. Pagat Hardini. Now, this is all simultaneous. It's not sequential. And only then does faithful love arise within. Tab harsyon preet bane aayi. And what happens then? Bahuchint visari har naam uradhari. Now, Nanak har bhay hai sakhai. So Nanak ji is saying, now the divine Har, my center, has become my companion. I'm always centered. And I have freed myself, I've been freed from this excessive anxiety of self-preservation. Bhakchanta Visari. Because now I have become anchored in wisdom. Haranam Uradhari. So Har Kirpa, as I said, does not arrive without a trigger. Grace. The Guru is the activator. It awakens devotion and inner disposition, and it reveals the Har, the inner self, that becomes the object of affection. And then the cessation of excessive worry, Bahuchinta Visari. By no means does this imply the end of situational concerns that we will always have, but the disappearance of its root, which again is the habitual internal agitation that comes about when we live in an ego-referential mode. Because you see, the ego, its primary problem is psychological angst. It's fear of being alone in identity. That is the root of its angst. And therefore it identifies with external things. It needs to control outcomes. It becomes compulsive in its self-preservation. But when your consciousness is reoriented with wisdom, when you're anchored in wisdom, that worry becomes unnecessary, because as Nanak says, now, tab harsyo preet bani aayi, and bahachint visari har naam uradhari. Har bhay hai sakhai. Now the Hari is my companion. So what that means is you have to orient the mind towards its own center. And once you are centered, then there is freedom from this internal agitation. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.